If Donald Trump were the 2024 nominee, would you support him?
I would not.
Okay. Liz Cheney.
Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney adding more fuel to the fire as tensions between Republican House leaders are escalating. In an interview with Politico, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said, quote, "When leaders don't work as a team, it creates difficulties." You don't say. We got J.D. Vance with us now. He is the author of the mega bestseller Hillbilly Elegy. He's joining me to talk about the current and future state of the GOP and perhaps some of his own political aspirations. J.D., great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Buck. Good to see you.
What do you make of the back and forth right now, it seems, between what I think we could loosely term, and all these descriptions are imprecise and people could quibble over them, but the more establishment wing of the GOP, which clearly seems to be trying to reassert itself at some level, and the remnants of, I suppose, the MAGA movement?
Well, I think in a lot of ways we all knew this would happen. I mean, folks on our side of this debate have been talking about this for a few years, that there would be this moment, whether it happened in 2000 or 2024, where the Republican Party debated what is it in the wake of the Trump presidency? Is it a Trumpist or populist or what have you party? Or does it go back to the old ways of doing things that were so unsuccessful in 2000, 2004 and beyond? And, the unfortunate thing for the folks in the establishment wing of the party is I just don't think the voters are actually with them that much. If you look at the big questions confronting the country today, the big tech issue, the trade and jobs issue, the rise of China, on all of those questions, the voters really do recognize that the old ways of doing things don't make any sense anymore. And so they're looking for a new direction. They're looking for us to sort of continue the pathway that's been set over the last 4 years. And so as much as there's a civil war at the elite level, I really don't think there's much of a civil war among the actual voters.
I think also there's a note of caution that we all keep in mind here, because you've got the New York Times Magazine, for example, running this piece, Liz Cheney versus MAGA. We all know divide and conquer, one of the oldest strategies in the book, and there's certainly a lot to be gained by Democrats by focusing and trying to fan the flames of this. But what do you think the GOP messaging right now at this stage? We're basically at the 100 days of Biden mark, and people have started to see, at least I certainly think they're seeing, that this is a leftist, climate-worshiping, Stalinist, authoritarian nutso party in a lot of ways. But there's not a lot of effective counter-messaging from the Republican side. I'm not saying legislation. I know they don't have the votes. But, J.D., you understand where the heart and soul of the party is these days, especially in the middle of the country. So what should the message be?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think we have to just have a positive vision of what we want the country to actually look like. And my basic answer to this question is, look, we want people to be able to live their lives, go eat at a restaurant if they want to, send their kids to school. We want them to be able to speak without censorship, whether that's censorship on social media or censorship from their employers. A lot of people are worried about losing their jobs if they just speak basic conservative views that they hold. And we want them to be able to have a good middle-class job, a good middle-class wage if they work hard and are willing to play by the rules. And in each of those spheres, I think, unfortunately, the Democratic Party is pushing in the other direction, especially on the censorship question. I think we're living in this weird moment where uttering basic common sense conservative views, even if you disagree with them, they were at least acceptable in polite discourse even 5, 6, 7 years ago. Now we're reaching a point where the Democratic Party, the presidential administration, the Biden administration, in cahoots with big tech, is making it hard for people just to say what they think about things. And I happen to think that the most important part of being an American citizen is participating in the public debate about our democracy. If you're worried that you're going to be censored, you're worried you're going to be fired from your job for saying something you believe in, you really don't have that most important American liberty. And I think Republicans have to stand up for that, if nothing else.
Do you think that there's some lessons learned being applied, or could be applied, perhaps a better way to put it, about the lack of some white working class voters' participation in the last election in key states? Michigan, obviously, I know you're in Ohio, and Ohio went for Trump. But there were a number of places, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, where a pretty small difference in, well, the vote in general, but specifically in the white working class vote. People who had even voted for Obama in a previous election either switched over to voting for Biden or just decided not to show up, which I think is probably the bigger problem. How can the GOP reach out to those folks? Or is the Democrat Party essentially doing the work for them by pushing more radical agenda items?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think we can always do more to reach out to those voters, and you're exactly right. If you look at just critical counties from 2016 to 2020, one of the things we could definitely improve on is igniting that same 2016 passion that existed among the white working class voters. But you're also seeing some evidence that whether it's the white or black or brown working class, the radicalism, especially on social and cultural issues, is pushing those folks to the Republican Party. These are not voters who hate their country. These are not voters who don't think there's a difference between men and women. These are not voters who think that we need to deconstruct children's gender when they're 6 years old. And so the craziness of the left may do a lot of the work for us, but I always think we should take the initiative and do as much as we can ourselves.
How would you assess, we're at this week now where we've got the Biden address to a joint session of Congress. I mean, not a State of the Union, but basically State of the Union. They just, for tradition and historical purposes, they don't call it that. We're going to be hearing a lot of stuff from Biden tomorrow. Just today, he came out with a mask on outside to tell everybody you don't need to mask up outside if you're vaccinated. How do you assess what we've seen in the first 100 days from this administration? And where do you think the primary weaknesses are for Republicans to step in and say, this is where they're leading you astray?
Yeah, well, I don't know really who's driving the wheel of the Biden administration. It seems like he's got a lot of powerful staff members and, of course, the vice president who seem to be driving a lot of the agenda. I think the agenda itself is quite radical. If you look at the substance of what they're trying to do, it's not just they're spending a lot of money, but they're spending it on Democratic Party cultural priorities. A bugaboo of mine is that they seem obsessed with the two-income family model that's prevalent among the professional class. They want to send every kid into daycare instead of making it easier for parents to care for their own children. But that's just one issue. There are a lot of issues where they're pushing their own cultural values onto the rest of the country. The other thing that they're doing is they're pretty radical about their quest and their willingness to take additional power for themselves. The DC statehood issue, the packing of the Supreme Court issue, the elimination of the filibuster issue, all of these effectively mean consolidation of Democratic rule, making it harder for Republicans to win and then exercise political power. But I think the structural willingness to alter American democracy has been something I've probably been most terrified of. But I think that the way in which they've most opened themselves up to criticism and give Republicans an opportunity is they're just so crazy on the cultural issues. I think we saw this a few weeks ago where the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, one of our most important diplomats, got up there and basically accused America of being a systemically racist country to its very core, that it was founded on white supremacy instead of liberty, justice for all. The idea that the country is just a bad place with bad people who live in it is something that not even most Democratic voters agree with. And I think people want improvements in the country. They want their lives a little bit easier. They want it a little bit, they want some possibility of gaining a middle-class job for themselves. They want their government to make it easier, not harder to do that. But they don't want to tear down their own country and their own society in the process. And I think, unfortunately, Democrats have lost that focus on making people's lives better and instead have emphasized the cultural anti-American radicalism. And I think that gives Republicans a lot of opportunities.
JD, before we let you go, speculation out there that you might be throwing your hat in the ring for a Senate contest in the great state of Ohio. What can you tell us?
Well, I'll give you the politician's answer that I'm thinking about it very seriously, but not yet ready to make an announcement or make a decision. But we'll let you know when I do.